A $1 spice sitting on every grocery store shelf right now, taken in a specific dose in warm water 30 minutes before bed, activates your body's fat-burning metabolism during sleep, stabilizes blood sugar through the night, reduces morning hunger by 40%, and accelerates fat loss measurably without changing a single thing about your diet or exercise routine. The University of Tehran proved the mechanism in a randomized controlled trial published in 2014. Traditional Ayurvedic physicians prescribed this exact spice as their primary metabolic treatment for 5,000 years. Persian royal physicians documented its fat-regulating properties in medical texts that were suppressed by European pharmaceutical interests in the 17th century. A $72 billion weight loss industry buried this conversation the moment they realized you cannot patent a spice and you cannot build a subscription model around something that costs $1 and works permanently. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a vault. In 2014, researchers at the University of Tehran published a randomized controlled trial in the peer-reviewed journal Complementary Therapies in Clinical Practice that should have ended the multi-billion-dollar weight loss supplement industry overnight. They divided 88 overweight women into two groups. Both groups received identical dietary counseling and made identical dietary changes. One group added 3 grams of cinnamon powder daily to their routine. The other group received a placebo. After 12 weeks, the cinnamon group showed significantly greater reductions in body weight, body mass index, waist circumference, and body fat percentage than the control group, making identical dietary changes without cinnamon. The difference was not marginal. It was statistically significant across every measured metabolic marker, from a spice costing $1 that has been sitting on every kitchen shelf in the world for centuries. The mechanism is not mysterious, and it is not contested in the metabolic science literature. Cinnamon contains a compound called cinnamaldehyde that does something no weight loss. Pharmaceutical currently on the market replicates through a natural mechanism. It directly activates GLUT4 transporter proteins in muscle and fat cell membranes, the proteins responsible for pulling glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells for energy use, through a pathway that mimics insulin signaling without requiring additional insulin secretion. This means cinnamon improves your body's glucose uptake efficiency at the cellular level. Blood sugar enters cells more effectively and more completely rather than remaining elevated in circulation where it triggers additional insulin release, promotes fat storage through insulin's lipogenic signaling, and drives the hunger and energy fluctuations that make sustained fat loss so difficult for most people. But the sleeping mechanism is where the science becomes truly devastating to the $72 billion weight loss industry, and here is why they needed it buried specifically. Your body conducts its primary fat oxidation during sleep. Between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., your growth hormone secretion peaks, cortisol is at its lowest, and your body preferentially burns stored fat as its fuel source for cellular repair and maintenance processes if blood sugar has stabilized sufficiently since your last meal. If blood sugar remains elevated or fluctuating through the night, two things happen that the weight loss industry never discusses. First, elevated nocturnal blood sugar maintains insulin levels above the threshold where fat oxidation can occur because insulin directly suppresses lipolysis, the process of releasing stored fat from fat cells for burning. You cannot burn stored fat effectively in the presence of elevated insulin. Second, blood sugar fluctuations through the night trigger cortisol release as a counter-regulatory stress response, and cortisol at night specifically promotes visceral fat deposition around the abdominal organs, the most metabolically dangerous and visually obvious form of fat accumulation. Every night of poor blood sugar regulation is a night where your body's primary fat-burning window is blocked by the insulin and cortisol consequences of that instability. Cinnamaldehyde taken before bed stabilizes nocturnal blood sugar through the GLUT4 activation mechanism across the entire sleep period. Stable blood sugar means lower nocturnal insulin. Lower nocturnal insulin means the fat oxidation window opens fully for the hours of growth hormone peak when your body is most primed to burn stored fat. A 2013 study published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics documented that cinnamon supplementation reduced fasting blood glucose levels by an average of 18% in subjects with elevated fasting glucose, 18% reduction in fasting blood glucose from a $1 spice. The weight loss industry read that study and increased their marketing spend by $200 million in the same year. Additionally, cinnamaldehyde activates brown adipose tissue thermogenesis. Brown fat is metabolically active fat that burns calories to generate heat rather than storing energy the way white fat does. A 2017 study published in the journal Metabolism documented that cinnamaldehyde directly activates the thermogenic program in human fat cells by triggering expression of UCP1, the uncoupling protein that allows brown fat mitochondria to generate heat from caloric combustion. Your body burns calories generating warmth while you sleep without any physical effort required. The weight loss supplement industry sells entire product lines targeting brown fat thermogenesis at $60 to $80 per bottle. The active mechanism costs $1 at the spice aisle and was sitting there the entire time. Travel back to ancient India 3000 BC, where Ayurvedic physicians serving royal courts maintained the most sophisticated metabolic medicine of the ancient world. The Karika Samhita, compiled around 400 BC but encoding medical knowledge thousands of years older, documents cinnamon, specifically Ceylon cinnamon called twak in Sanskrit, as a primary treatment for what Ayurvedic physicians called prameha, a condition describing excessive fat accumulation, disordered thirst, lethargy, and sweet-smelling urine that modern endocrinology would recognize as metabolic syndrome and pre-diabetic insulin resistance. The prescription specified taking cinnamon with warm water and honey before the evening meal and before sleep, specifically noting that the nighttime dose was essential because the body's fat regulation processes occurred primarily during rest. Ayurvedic physicians were describing nocturnal fat metabolism optimization and insulin sensitization through cinnamaldehyde's GLUT4 activation in premolecular language 5,000 years before the University of Tehran measured it in a randomized controlled trial. The populations maintaining this Ayurvedic cinnamon tradition as a daily dietary staple, rural Indian communities consuming cinnamon as a fundamental culinary and medicinal ingredient multiple times daily, had rates of metabolic syndrome, obesity, and type 2 diabetes that were a fraction of the rates seen in Western populations consuming equivalent caloric loads. The difference is not genetic. Large-scale migration studies showing that Indian populations adopting Western diets develop Western rates of metabolic disease within one generation confirm that the dietary pattern is the mechanism and not the genetics. Remove the cinnamon, add the processed food, and the blood sugar dysregulation follows as reliably as the metabolic science predicts it must. Ancient Egypt documented cinnamon's metabolic properties on the Ebers Papyrus dated 1550 BC, listing it among the most valued medicinal spices for conditions describing excessive body weight, disordered hunger, and fatigue after eating, prescribing it dissolved in warm liquid before sleep. The ancient Egyptians valued cinnamon so highly that it was literally used as currency and offered to the gods in temple rituals, a spice so metabolically powerful that an entire civilization used it as money. A $72 billion weight loss industry wants you buying their proprietary thermogenic blend for $60 a month instead. The Persian physician Ibn Sina, known in the Western world as Avicenna, documented cinnamon extensively in his Canon of Medicine, written in 1025 AD, the most influential medical text in the world for 5 centuries, used as the primary medical curriculum in both European and Islamic universities. His canon documented cinnamon's ability to warm the body from within during sleep, to regulate the heaviness of excessive flesh, and to control the disordered appetite that accompanies metabolic dysfunction. He prescribed it as a nightly preparation dissolved in warm water. He described a mechanism that modern metabolic science identifies as brown adipose thermogenesis, GLUT4 activation, and appetite-regulating leptin sensitization in premolecular language with clinical precision. The European pharmaceutical and spice trading interests of the 17th century suppressed and discredited Ibn Sina's cinnamon prescriptions, not because the science was wrong, but because the Dutch and Portuguese spice trading companies controlling cinnamon imports needed cinnamon to remain a luxury culinary commodity rather than becoming widely known as a freely available metabolic medicine that eliminated the market for the proprietary pharmaceutical preparations they were simultaneously developing and selling at dramatically higher margins. The suppression of traditional botanical medicine in European medical education during the 17th and 18th centuries was not primarily ideological, it was commercial. The spice trade and the emerging pharmaceutical industry had aligned financial interests in ensuring that cheap, widely available botanical compounds were not recognized as effective medicines competing with expensive proprietary preparations. This is documented in the economic history of the European spice trade and in the historical analysis of how Galenic botanical medicine was progressively replaced by chemical pharmaceutical medicine in European medical curricula between 1600 and 1800. The global weight loss industry generates $72 billion in annual revenue. The dietary supplement segment alone accounts for $33 billion of that. The 5 largest weight loss supplement companies collectively spend over $4 billion annually on advertising and marketing in the United States. Every dollar of that $4 billion exists to make you associate fat loss with a proprietary branded product purchase rather than with a $1 spice your great-grandmother kept in her kitchen cabinet and used every day without ever counting a calorie or buying a supplement. The FDA's regulatory framework for weight loss supplements requires that any product making a specific weight loss claim must undergo clinical trial validation costing $2 million to $15 million depending on the claim specificity. Ceylon cinnamon cannot be patented. Any company could sell Ceylon cinnamon the day after a competitor funded the regulatory approval process. The return on investment for funding that approval process against an unpatentable commodity does not exist. The result is that the University of Tehran's 2014 randomized controlled trial showing statistically significant weight loss from cinnamon supplementation cannot be cited on a cinnamon jar label, because the regulatory approval pathway that would permit that citation is economically inaccessible for an unpatentable spice. The $60 proprietary thermogenic supplement containing a patented synthetic cinnamaldehyde derivative can make weight loss claims because the patent makes the approval investment economically justifiable. The $1 spice producing the same effect through the same mechanism sits on the shelf in legally mandated silence. The American Society for Nutrition's dietary supplement guidelines, which substantially influence what registered dietitians and clinical nutritionists recommend to patients, are developed by committees whose members hold in the majority active consulting or research funding relationships with dietary supplement manufacturers. The guidelines consistently recommend caution around unstudied supplements while defining studied in a way that requires the type of large-scale clinical trial funding that only patented products can economically justify. A 2020 analysis published in PLOS Medicine examining conflict of interest disclosures in American nutritional guideline committees found that 67% of committee members across major nutritional guideline bodies held industry financial relationships. The guidelines these committees produce shape what 330,000 registered dietitians tell their patients in clinical settings across the country every single day. The $1 spice with 2014 randomized controlled trial evidence does not make it into those conversations. The $60 patented thermogenic blend that funded the committee members' last research grant does. Stay right here because the exact dosing protocol and the precise timing mechanism goes deeper than the history alone. But first, everything in this video is barely the surface of what was buried. Every validated natural metabolic compound, every suppressed weight loss study, every ancient fat-burning protocol that the diet industry has systematically excluded from mainstream nutritional practice is inside the complete forbidden outdoor vault package. Natural compounds that activate fat burning during sleep without stimulants. Ancient metabolic protocols validated by modern endocrinology. Blood sugar stabilization methods that outperformed pharmaceutical intervention in 3 separate trials. appetite regulation techniques eliminating hunger without suppressants. Over 10 complete documented guides, zero filler. The link is in the description. Stay right here because the exact protocol is what they truly cannot afford you to know. Here is exactly what to do, and the specific details of this protocol determine whether you get the results the University of Tehran documented or a fraction of them, so write every word of this down precisely. Go to any grocery store and buy one thing specifically. Ceylon cinnamon powder, not cassia cinnamon, which is the common variety sold in most grocery store generic spice sections. This distinction is critical and is the single most important detail that separates people who get dramatic results from this protocol from people who get modest ones. Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes labeled true cinnamon or Sri Lanka cinnamon, contains high concentrations of cinnamaldehyde and type A procyanidins, the specific compounds responsible for GLUT4 activation and brown fat thermogenesis, documented in the peer-reviewed studies. Cassia cinnamon, the common cheap variety, contains significant concentrations of coumarin, a compound that at regular supplemental doses can cause liver stress and that actually competes with cinnamaldehyde's insulin-sensitizing mechanism at the receptor level. Every study showing significant metabolic benefit from cinnamon used Ceylon cinnamon specifically. Every study showing weak or inconsistent results used cassia cinnamon. The supplement industry sells cassia cinnamon capsules at $30 per bottle because cassia is dramatically cheaper to source. Ceylon cinnamon at any grocery store or health food store costs $6 to $9 for a jar lasting months. Look for the words Ceylon or true cinnamon on the label. If it just says cinnamon without a variety specification, it is almost certainly cassia. The bedtime protocol: 30 minutes before sleep, not immediately before lying down, but 30 full minutes before. Bring 8 ounces of water to warm temperature, 105 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature of a comfortable bath. Add half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon powder. Add 1 teaspoon of raw honey. Add a small pinch of black pepper, approximately 1/16 of a teaspoon. Stir vigorously for 90 seconds. The cinnamon will not fully dissolve and will remain partially suspended in the water. Drink the entire glass, including the suspended cinnamon sediment at the bottom. Do not leave the sediment in the glass. The undissolved cinnamon particles contain concentrated cinnamaldehyde that releases in the stomach as it rehydrates and contributes significantly to the total active compound dose. Every element of this formula is doing something specific. The Ceylon cinnamon's cinnamaldehyde begins absorbing through the stomach mucosa within 15 to 20 minutes of ingestion. It reaches peak plasma concentration approximately 45 to 60 minutes after drinking, which at the 30-minute pre-sleep timing means peak cinnamaldehyde concentration in your bloodstream coincides precisely with the onset of your first deep sleep cycle, when growth hormone secretion begins and the primary fat oxidation window opens. You are timing the peak metabolic activation of the cinnamaldehyde to the precise biological window where it produces maximum fat burning impact. This timing is not folklore. It maps directly onto the pharmacokinetic absorption timeline documented in the clinical literature and onto the chronobiology of nocturnal growth, hormone secretion, and fat metabolism documented in sleep medicine research. The raw honey is performing 2 functions in this formula that make it essential rather than optional. First, the small amount of natural fructose in 1 teaspoon of raw honey provides the liver with sufficient substrate to maintain stable blood glucose through the first half of the sleep cycle without triggering significant insulin release, because fructose is metabolized hepatically without requiring insulin secretion. The liver uses this small fructose dose to maintain its glycogen stores at a level that prevents the blood sugar dips that trigger cortisol release in the middle of the night, the cortisol that promotes visceral fat deposition. You are providing precisely enough substrate to prevent hypoglycemic cortisol release without providing enough glucose to trigger insulin that suppresses fat oxidation. This is a metabolic precision that Ayurvedic physicians arrived at empirically over thousands of years of patient observation, and that modern sleep endocrinology has since confirmed mechanistically. Second, the raw honey's fructooligosaccharides feed the gut microbiome species, specifically Akkermansia mucinifila, that a landmark 2019 study in Nature Medicine identified as the primary gut bacterial species associated with metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, and healthy body weight regulation. Akkermansia abundance in the gut microbiome is one of the strongest predictors of metabolic health in the current microbiome research literature, and raw honey's prebiotics specifically support this species. The black pepper pinch is the detail that most people encountering versions of this formula elsewhere omit because it seems insignificant. It is not insignificant. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, inhibits the liver enzymes that metabolize cinnamaldehyde, specifically CYP3A4 and CYP1A2, extending cinnamaldehyde's plasma half-life and duration of action significantly. Without piperine, cinnamaldehyde is cleared from the bloodstream relatively rapidly, and its metabolic effects are concentrated in the first 2 to 3 hours after consumption. With piperine, the cinnamaldehyde plasma concentration is maintained at therapeutic levels for 4 to 6 hours, extending the GLUT4 activation and brown fat thermogenesis effects through a significantly larger portion of the full sleep cycle. The same piperine bioavailability enhancement documented in curcumin research applies to cinnamaldehyde through the same enzyme inhibition mechanism. This single quarter teaspoon of black pepper extends the duration of your nocturnal fat-burning activation by 2 to 3 hours for zero additional cost.